Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Welcome to it. It's Friday. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, and you bring on Purdue. Elijah brought the whiskey. I brought the beer. It's a Boilermaker Friday. I wish one of us had thought ahead to do this, but good to have you in. Can join us today on Hail Varsity Radio. Numbers to get in: 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Numbers to get in: email chris@hailvarsity.com, and find us on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah. And email chris@hailvarsity.com again. So when you hear the term Boilermaker, what do you think of first? Do you think of Dumb and Dumber and Seabass and Make It 4 Boilermakers? Do you think of the shot of whiskey in the beer? In some instances, you put the shot in the beer, all right, like the movie A River Runs Through It? Or do you think of that creepy mascot and the stupid train? I'll be honest with you. When I think of Boilermakers, I tend to lean towards the drink. Or Big Dog Glenn Robinson, or Gene Katie's Miraculous Comb Over, and a little bit Drew Brees, right? And those early 2000 teams that beat Kansas State in the Alamo Bowl.
See, when I was young and we joined the Big Ten, Purdue Pete haunted my dreams.
Well, because he's got the sledgehammer and the
unwavering eyes.
Right, and he's got he's the engineer, but
he stares into your soul. He really does.
So, but it's been soul taking for Nebraska the last two trips there. Not good with Riley, 55-45. You had last year that was just a debacle. It came down to it. And then this year, and Tom Chattel's got a good story that just came out, and he's probably not wrong. You know, Nebraska needs to win out, and that's not impossible, other than, you know, Nebraska always plays the opponent and always plays themselves, it seems like, every Saturday. But Nebraska could flip things around and start off a little run tomorrow at 11 o'clock on BTN. We'll dive into what may happen and some things that need to happen. Derek Peterson's going to be with us from HailVarsity.com and magazine in about 15 minutes. Pride of Fairbury, NBC Sports, Bill Doleman at 5:05, and then a recruiting recon hit with Greg Smith. And we'll have the Friday forecast for you. We are going to Effort Clausburn. He has been away for way too long, and we don't know how Clausborn's trips south of the border always go for him. So if we don't have Claus, you'll have me and Elijah doing steak and beer bets about 5 or 6 times over. Make it real interesting.
Yeah, if we're gonna do that, I need some Boilermakers.
Okay, just so there's an excuse built in.
Oh yeah.
So we'll dive into it. But listen, I want to start off with this. And Bill Moose talked with Mitch Sherman this morning on our KFOR tailgate. And it was good to get caught up with Mitch, and a lot of things were covered in Mitch's story. But the first thing that was addressed was this notion out there about job security, Nebraska, and Scott Frost. And it was a podcast by Pete Thamel from Yahoo, and I don't know who else was on the podcast. I didn't listen to it. But you had Herman and Frost as kind of your headlines, okay, of guys on the hot seat. And then the token Michigan and Harbaugh, right? And that, I think, really pissed off Bill Moose. You're, 11 days, 12 days, 13 days from that December 16th through 19th signing day window. And National guys have contacts. National guys are going to hear lots of things around the campfire from all of their different people in different conferences, Power 5, Group of 5, whatever. And I don't doubt that guys like Thamel and people you've disagreed with vehemently during this Big Ten, let's bash Nebraska, let's return to football chant that has grown loud and engaged a lot of Twitter timelines, and I'm talking the 40s of the world and the Wetzels of the world. Nebraska fans will always fight back and have Nebraska's back. That's just the fan base, right? But when it comes to just throwing crap against the wall, listen, the record is what it is. It's 10-19 for Scott Frost in year 3. The record for Scott Frost against Northwestern is 1-2. You're 0-2 against Wisconsin. You're going to be 1-2 or 0-3 against Purdue. You're 2-1 against the Illini. Okay, and you are 0-4 against Iowa. You're not getting curb stomped by anybody. Illinois did curb stomp you, but you get my point. I mean, you've been gradually closing that gap, but it's still double-digit losses to Wisconsin. And I think you're 1-1 pending a 2-1 or 1-2 against Minnesota. So the neighborhood you live in, you're over 500 against Illinois. That's it. Okay? And anywhere else, anybody else, it'd be all right to start questioning and doubting. And it's okay to question and doubt now, but to go that step of saying, yeah, Scott Frost is on the hot seat as a national college football guy with the stature of Yahoo in your podcast, it's fun to talk coaching carousel, but have some evidence with it. And there's none. There is none with it. And Bill Moose came out in The Athletic and says, he's here as long as I'm here. Things and support are great. Now, Nebraska needs to win some football games, and that can start tomorrow. I'm interested to see, as more people chirp about Nebraska, what is the problem? Why are things still just a grind? Why are you still, and it's going to be a mountain climb. We all know that. But it's an issue. And you hate going here with culture because you feel like it's an excuse. And when the coach talks about it, you're like, okay, he's talking clapping, he's talking accountability. I mean, there's 100 different things that go into making a good football team. And what you're not seeing very many Saturdays is taking care of the football. I mean, Nebraska has 55 turnovers since 2018. So you're not taking care of the football. You're not great against the run. You're better this year, but that's taken some time to get the right pieces and be more of a Big Ten, let's stop the run defense. Nebraska's recruited well. But your attrition, while it worked for P.J. Fleck to flip the roster his first 2 years and in year 3, bang, have an 11-3, you're seeing some issues with the talent. I wonder moving forward as you reassess, this third year, whether Nebraska wins out and gets to 4-4, whether Nebraska sticks with 2 or 3 wins, whether Nebraska ends up with only one win. There's going to be a major reassessment. You're going to get introspective as a head coach and as a staff. And we'll get into this with Greg Smith in a little bit recruiting-wise, but Nebraska right now is at the point where they need Omar Mannings. They need Mo Washingtons. They need Flemings. They need guys that are just absolute difference makers with their talent. And you saw glimpses of that with Mo. You'll see glimpses of that with Omar Manning if and when he ever gets on the field. And you saw a guy like Fleming come in against the Big Ten's best defense and one of the best defenses in college football in his second game, because Wisconsin didn't happen. In his second game, get on the field 5 for 75, right? But I think what Nebraska has done in order to get some wins is go talent first and hope the good rubs or erases some of the immaturity. I don't want to say bad, but some of the immaturity. And it turns out, and I don't know each full detailed case, but clearly you had immaturity in a guy who couldn't hack it for multiple reasons in Mo Washington. Okay. You're waiting for Omar to get on the field and get healthy. And then you had Fleming and Delancey leave. High-profile kids. But Nebraska reached because you were wowed by their talent and you beat out some teams for them. But when push comes to shove, by different accounts, when I talk to some folks in the football know, it's the Monday through Friday that some of these dudes can handle. And right now in that locker room, there's no peer enforcement. That's still building. All right. And you have an issue right now where you have some guys that are playing that are those talent difference makers. But, man, they need to clean up their Monday through Friday. But yet you're Scott Frost and you want to go recruit talent, but you want guys to go about it the right way Monday through Friday. You want the work ethic to equal the talent, right? And you just have, and it's always been this way, it's not just 2020 kids, it's not just 2019 kids, it's not just 1995 kids, it's not just 1990. Just go through the years, right? You'll just end up making a mistake that ends up not panning out for you because you go with talent over the type of person and teammate a kid is. You want the whole ball of wax. You don't always get that. And in today's day and age, kids will just bolt. And there's a history of kind of high school hopping around the country. There's a history of team hopping around. You probably know somebody that has jumped and flipped teams. It's just how things have worked with AAU, right? Just to cite an example. So that's one thing that I think is contributing to 10 and 19. You need dudes, you need difference makers, but are you getting the guy that can be patient and work his way up and handle 21 plays against Penn State in a win and be okay with that? Versus a guy that is ticked off that he saw 40 plays, 5 catches, 75 yards, and was happy that he contributed, but he's pissed. He's more pissed in a win than a loss because he didn't get the football. So Nebraska's sifting through that. Another insider with the Big Ten in Adam Rittenberg's story today touches on Nebraska's coaching staff. And this is the quote. It's Nebraska. They threw a bunch of money at you. You build the best staff you can, says one industry source. Showing loyalty to everybody who helped you at UCF. I don't know if that was the right move. I think he makes wholesale staff changes. That is an industry insider. I don't know. And listen, as a Nebraska fan, you see a lot of things wrong with your football team. You're ticked off at the quarterback play. You're ticked off at the offensive line play. You're ticked off at the receiver play. You just made a change there. Defensively, what's going on? I don't think you can be let's take the Illinois part, and you can't ignore it. But let's look at the defense this year. I think the defense has been good enough. Nebraska could very easily be 4-1.
I think the defense is good enough to win you games.
Your offense has been scoring 20 a game. Mm-hmm. That's garbage.
We talked about this before the year. We said, what was the number that the Husker offense had to get for them to be able to compete in every game? We said mid-30s. I think I said 35. Mm-hmm. The Husker offense has been nowhere close. The defense has been holding teams below 30 points. With consistency. The defense has been good enough. The defense hasn't been the problem. So wholesale staff change, I think, is ridiculous.
But again, back to this national outlook of not knowing what you're talking about.
I mean, when 2020, loyalty is just a word in the dictionary, especially in sports.
It is, but I look at this staff, though, Elijah, and I'm like, I know year 3, they need to, kick it in gear. and they need to win tomorrow. If you're a Nebraska fan, they need to beat Minnesota if they get a chance to play Minnesota. They need to beat Michigan or Rutgers. I mean, you'll get your game tomorrow against Purdue, and then you're either going to get Minnesota or you're going to get Rutgers. Okay, to end the regular season, because it doesn't look like Michigan's going to play Ohio State. So that means it's going to be the makeup of Maryland, Ohio State. And then right now you're probably seeded, if you can put some wins together, to take on a Michigan or a Michigan State. So you have a real chance to end up 4-4. But you got to get your offense figured out. And I think some ways Nebraska can tomorrow, a quarterback run, but I think you're probably going to see Mills, all right? I think you're probably going to see Tompkins. So you can lean on that 1-2 running punch and figure out who's going to get open and catch the football. Now, your special teams can't tell Purdue's special teams to hold my beer. That'll be your difference tomorrow. First team to 30 wins tomorrow. And you can't get worn out assuming Moore and Bell play. We don't know who's all going to be MIA for Purdue, but the line's now down to 1.5. We'll dive more into this. Derek Peterson's on the way. It's Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
And we're back
Fellas, think we could listen to the radio lesson?
on Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Yes! That's awesome!
Great to be with you on a Friday. It's Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. How does Nebraska get it done in West Lafayette? Again, when you hear Boilermaker, do you think of the drink or the creepy mascot? We say hi to Derek Peterson at Dr. PDHV on Twitter. So we'll pose you that first question, Derek. The drink or the mascot?
There's a Boilermaker drink? I didn't know about this.
Really? Did you ever see Dumb and Dumber?
A long time ago.
So it's not in one of your top fives, I take it?
No, it's not, no.
We got to talk.
Jim Carrey is it's Jim Carrey, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I can kind of take or leave Jim Carrey.
Man.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
if you'd like
okay.
me to leave, I can leave.
No, I don't want you to leave. I mean, the Dumb and Dumber, just check out the Seabass part about making 4 Boilermakers. That's a shot of whiskey in your beer.
That sounds dangerous.
It sounds like, yes. Well, you may need it to get through tomorrow, is what I'm telling you.
Just as a simpleton, it's just a whiskey beer to me.
Right.
Yeah.
As an Elijah off the top rope with the steel chair, as a simpleton. So I need to get into your story, man. Congrats on another just really awesome column and story on HailVarsity.com. And you explored the snap issue. Give folks a little info on your story, who you spoke with, and just your takeaway.
Well, I actually got to give a shout-out to Mike Babcock first, because I texted him on Sunday and said, hey, I want to write about Cam snapping, who are some former players that I should reach out to, and he gave me a handful of recommendations, and Rob and Matt Hoskinson were the 2 guys that I was able to get in touch with on short notice, and Matt was really interesting in that he played guard, left guard, center, and right guard throughout school, and he kind of prided himself on he told me that he was like, I had learned early on that my path to the field was going to be learning how to snap the football. And so, it was interesting to talk to those guys. I made the joke to both of them that I was like, I'm going to ask you if the lines that you played on ever went through any kind of issues, like similar to what Cam's going through now. And I kind of prefaced that question with I wasn't alive when you guys were playing. So if you were,
and they reacted how?
I don't know about it. They, Rob told me, I did not need to hear that, Derek. Made me feel old.
And that's Dr. Rob to a T.
Matt just laughed. But I really appreciated the insight that those guys gave. And In particular, Matt, he really kind of broke down and spelled out some of the technical things that you can see with Cam and his snap. And, once he talked about those things, I kind of went back through and watched him play a handful of times and was like, oh, yeah, there it is right there in front of my face. Head's not over the ball. He can get a little, Matt uses the phrase wristy with his snap, which tends to go high and right. And, the thing that was interesting to me was that both of those guys, and then obviously, Scott and Adrian on the team currently, like the people around Cam Jurgens kind of feel like, look, like, yeah, he's got to get it worked out. Yeah, it's something that needs to get fixed relatively soon for their offense just because of the timing component of it. But, most, I'd say the people with opinions that matter, and I'm not going to put myself in that camp because I was pretty critical of Cam as well, believe that he'll get it turned around and believe that he's going to have a really, really bright future and career as a center. And it was interesting that Scott Frost kind of emphatically said on Monday of this week that Cam is too talented a player to take off the field, and he's too talented a player to move out of that center position. And so, in that same moment, Scott acknowledged, hey, it's got to get fixed. It has to be better. Everybody kind of says that, but, it's interesting that everybody still feels very strongly about his potential as a center. And one of the things that Rob pointed out was, when the snap is good, and Hoskinson agreed with this, when the snap is good, he's crushing dudes. He's been, when the snap is good, he's one of their better offensive linemen. It's just, one of those things where, like Matt said, when you have a bad snap, you know it immediately, and it just throws off everything else just because of how quickly things happen when you're in the middle.
Derek, what's your take on the offensive line as a whole this year? I know the snaps have been a bit of a scapegoat for the offensive line and their play this year, but there was high hopes for the offensive line coming in on the season, a lot of returning experience. And I'm not sure that they've always lived up to expectations. What's your take on that? Yeah,
it's the classic case of expectations kind of influencing perception. We were, the stuff that we heard was that Brendan Hymas would be one of the best left tackles in the country, that the offensive line would be a strength of the team. And that's not to say that Brendan Hymas has played poorly. I don't think he's been the issue at all. But they haven't been a strength of the team. They haven't been consistent. And so, I think they get evaluated a little bit based on what the expectation was coming in, as opposed to just evaluating them straight up. You could call that unfair or whatever, but I have been disappointed with the way that the offensive line has played, because, the expectation was that they were going to be a strength of the team. The expectation was that Nebraska was going to be able to run the football successfully, and for long stretches of the season, the only success Nebraska's had rushing the ball has come with the quarterbacks. There are a lot of other reasons for that. It's not just the offensive line. Dedrick Mills being out plays a factor there. But yeah, I think, it hasn't been the season that any of those guys expected. And that's caused the offense some problems.
Derek Peterson's with us, HailVarsity.com and magazine, at Dr. PDHV on Twitter is where you find him. Derek, let's go to West Lafayette. Your gut says what for Saturday tomorrow with Nebraska and Purdue in this matchup? Do you think Nebraska gets on the right side, or is this just another movie that too many have seen this year with almost but not quite?
It'd be really interesting to see what's going on with Purdue. The reporting out of West Lafayette is that they've had a significant issue with opt-outs so far. So it'll be interesting to see who's kind of on the field warming up, ready to go before kickoff. If they've got, I don't want to name names because I don't have any inside information, but if they've got significant pieces out, you feel better about Nebraska's chances. What's the line right now? It's close, right?
It's down.
Is it under 3 points still?
No, it's dropped. It's dropped in half. It's down to 1.5, and my math.
Yeah, so it's essentially a pick 'em.
It is. My math says if we're talking opt-outs, And I don't have inside info either, but if you see that line move, it means that you probably don't have Rondale Moore, okay? And also, if you're Nebraska, the fingers that have been crossed may work to Nebraska's favor with Mills back. And I'm not saying Mills is worth 1.5 points or 0.5 points or 1/4 point, but you get a healthy Mills back with the run game on top of the quarterback run. I mean, that's music for Nebraska, right? So that's my crazy math, at least. That's my lean. But I think that's going to be tight, and it's going to be also which special teams decides to suck least tomorrow between the two teams.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the story of the season for Nebraska is, can it play a perfect game? Which is where it's at. Can it play a game without mistakes? That's a really hard thing to do with a normal team. That's an even harder thing to do with the youth that Nebraska has on its roster. So we'll see. I was encouraged by the way that Adrian Martinez played a week ago against Iowa. Really encouraged, I would say. I don't charge him with the fumble at the end of the game. So we'll see. They gotta avoid the holding on the big fourth down run or the fourth quarter run that Adrian had. That holding was killer. They got to avoid those kind of untimely mistakes. And it's that's what we said all season long. So I guess to answer your question, there's the potential that we see the same thing that we have seen. It's the ball's in Nebraska's court at this point in terms of what we see on Saturdays. It's not necessarily about how they match up with certain position groups or anything like that. It's can they play a clean game?
Derek Peterson with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. Derek, about 2 minutes left, and it feels like I ask you this question every single week, but I think it's important. You just kind of got into what the Huskers need to do as a team to go in and get the win, but who on the Husker team needs to step up, or what position group needs to step up if the Huskers want to walk out of West Lafayette tomorrow with a win?
Center. Snapping needs to be better. Offensive line needs to be better. Offensive line. They got to play better. It's Purdue. It's not like they're playing Ohio State or Penn State or to a lesser degree Iowa. That's either going to have a high level of talent in the front seven or excellent execution. It's Purdue. So win the trenches.
And Derek, just kind of on top of that, do you think that Bob Diaco's defense at Purdue is something that this Nebraska offense can use to exploit to finally get some rhythm going? It's felt like there's been no rhythm all year.
Will there be strain tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation about Bob Diaco's defense this week by Nebraska folks, I think, has been a little overrated. I think there's a little bit of just people maybe having a gag reflex to the name Bob Diaco and assuming that the defense isn't great. You look at, they gave up 37 points to Rutgers, and, I think you get a little bit of misperception there. Brandon Vogel kind of tallied the numbers, and they're better in terms of success rate and everything except for passing plays. So it's not like, the defense is just, butter that you can kind of slice through. So they could let's see if they have some downfield stuff. They've kind of been building a little bit, utilizing Austin Allen more, and they've been building a little bit in that regard. So let's see if they can do that. But I don't buy into the notion that they're just going to, rattle off 35 points on this Purdue defense because Bob Diaco's, the coordinator.
Yeah, Nebraska's not found that defense yet this season to go off. Derek Peterson's with us. Derek, can't wait to see your recap, and good stuff this week, as always, with HailVarsity.com. Have a good weekend. We'll talk soon. Thanks for jumping on, man.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
All right, there he is, Derek Peterson. Hail Varsity continues.
Chime in 402-466-ESPN or email the show, Chris@HailVarsity.com.
Just try me.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
40 minutes away, some recruiting recon from Greg Smith, recruiting insider, HailVarsity.com and magazine. 20 minutes away, the pride of Fairbury, NBC Sports, Bill Doleman. Great to be with you on a Friday. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Give us a follow on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah on Twitter. So we kind of kicked things off talking about the national perception and innuendo of Frost in year 3 versus the reality. Now, you did have an announcement today when it comes to the stadium project and the funding. So things are officially, per the Board of Regents, broken down into 2 phases, and phase 1 will get front and center attention when it comes to fundraising and proceeding, and that is cranking up the locker room, the practice facility, improvements for the players versus improvements to the stadium. And listen, fine with me, right? Not a huge deal, but newsworthy. And if you're going to break things down in a financially strapped 2020, what do you want to move forward with? You want to improve the facilities to attract more players. So when we look at Nebraska and Purdue, and back to what Tom Chattel wrote a little while back about what tomorrow is. I mean, every game's a big game. Your level of weariness has increased as the season has gone on just because of what we talked about with Derek and what we talk about every preview Friday. Nebraska's inability to just play the opponent versus playing themselves and the opponent. So I look at this situation tomorrow, and bowl eligibility is good for everybody, except bowl games are dropping like flies. And the bowl projections have not included Nebraska. But you beat Purdue, and you can take Purdue's name out of the mix and insert Nebraska into the mix down in Frisco, Texas, against probably Kansas State. Okay? And it's there for Nebraska to kind of snap this 3-year bowlless streak. And it starts one game at a time, but it starts tomorrow in West Lafayette. You know, if it goes bad tomorrow, why is it going to go bad? It's going to go bad because you'll have snap issues, and it's going to go bad because you're going to have turnovers. And it's going to go bad because some of the guys not opting out tomorrow won't be Bell and Rondale Moore. My fear, if I'm a Nebraska fan, is that Nebraska's secondary that's been really good this year gets lit up. Purdue, Braum, they do a great job of getting dudes in space. They do a good job of getting vertical. They have a tight end that's damn talented. And that's 3 receivers to jerk with tomorrow, because I just don't put any money on Nebraska getting after the quarterback. I just don't. So I would take a page out of Rutgers' book and hold on to that damn football as long as I can and let Braum and Rondale and Bell watch and go to work. And Rutgers ran their quarterback, not named Noah. Nebraska has 2 quarterbacks. What do they do best? They run the football well. Find the tight end. Get Mills back. Get going downhill. And for the love of God, again, don't be worse than Purdue tomorrow in special teams. Purdue lost last week because they gave up a kickoff return. That was the 7-point difference. That, and Rutgers held the ball for 13 minutes in the fourth quarter. Rutgers, better, but that's a game Purdue should win, especially the way they dismantled Illinois only to hold on, and then the way they fought back and won a tight game without Moore. It was just Bell doing work against Iowa. We've seen how good Iowa is at 4-2. They started out 0-2, remember. So I think Nebraska's secondary is going to need some uncharacteristic help from the front 7 with some pressure. And I'm not talking just pure sack numbers, but hurry, right? Get after them. And then it's always about turnovers for Nebraska. Their record is nuts if they're even or they win the turnover battle. But from a field goal standpoint, Purdue struggles there as well. I mean, you look back at the Minnesota game where they got hosed. They got hosed on the phantom call, the interference, the offensive pass interference. They had a field goal blocked, and they had a field goal missed. Okay? So right there, I do like Nebraska's field goal situation. Not in love with their punting, but Nebraska can't give up a touchdown tomorrow. And you look at the Iowa game, right? I mean, what screwed them? The turnovers in the fourth quarter, but specifically, look how short the fields were for Iowa to drive, right? I mean, they were 60, 65-yard or better starting positions for Iowa last week. So it really is pretty simple. And I look forward to seeing a good dose of Luke and a good dose of Adrian. And I liked what I saw from Adrian throwing the football. I think you can build on that. First team to 30.
To me, I think this game tomorrow comes down to red zone defenses for both teams. I remember that from Diaco's days at Notre Dame. I remember it from Nebraska, his 1 year here.
They're good in the red zone.
Yeah, his game plan defensively is to let you get to midfield, clamp it down once you get past midfield, and if you get down to the red zone, he's going to clamp it down even more. It's hard to score on a Diaco defense traditionally. Mm-hmm. And Nebraska's defense is kind of the same way with the amount of snaps they're forced to play. They've been very good down inside their own 30-yard line. So I think that's where this game comes down to. If it becomes a field goal battle,
I'm betting Nebraska.
I'm betting Nebraska. But if Nebraska's defense can't keep Purdue out of the end zone and Nebraska gets down to the red zone and has to kick field goals, obviously you're going to lose that game. So it sounds easy to say red zone defense, but
it's really true.
It's really true. Whichever team has the better red zone defense is probably going to give themselves a really good chance to win tomorrow.
Well, and it comes back to Purdue's aerial assault, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, getting Moore and Bell can crush you for a big play. The tight end can hit you for a big play. You don't have to worry about red zone offense if you're scoring on a big play. You know, I mean, missing a tackle or Bell gets deep. What's Nebraska's penalty situation like when it comes to defensive pass interferences or defensive holdings tomorrow? Now, clearly, you're going to absolutely tackle some dude if he's got you beat. It's better than giving up a touchdown. But I look back to Penn State and Dotson and that receiving crew Penn State had. They're not Purdue's crew, but Dotson's really damn good. And you look at Ohio State. Nebraska has seen good receiving cores on the field this year. So you may have the best, though, in the Big Ten that are Ohio State tomorrow down in West Lafayette. But I think Nebraska will be up to the challenge. But, again, I think both defenses are going to have a hard time being as good as they've been. Mm-hmm. And it's going to come down to, you said it, red zone offense versus red zone defense. And I wonder if we'll see I don't want to say a more conservative, but a more managed Frost in the red zone. Last year, cuteness killed Nebraska. We'll wind down hour one next.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Well, we are going to do the Boilermaker tour with Bill Doleman. I'm sure Bill had a Boilermaker or several with his friend Henry Rollins back in the day on O Street in Lincoln at Duffy's. So we'll talk to Bill Doleman, prior to Fairbury NBC Sports. We may even, dare I ask him about James Harden and what he'll do without Russ by his side. Yeah, Russ is in D.C. now. Reminder about moving. Speaking of moving, Russell Westbrook. West Blue Realty. Your friends at West Blue Realty, they're located at 1120 K Street in Suite 200. I'm talking about Tom Luby. I'm talking about Kelly Hofschneider. Give Tom a shout with West Blue Realty at 402-540-3768. Kelly Hofschneider. Give Kelly a call as well with West Blue Realty, 402-202-2312. If you're looking to make a move, they specialize, West Blue Realty does, in residential home sales in Lincoln and the surrounding communities. And when you mention Hail Varsity, they will and can provide you up to $1,000 off the closing of your next home purchase. Do you have agricultural land? They specialize in that as well. So My point is this. Find West Blue Realty, westbluerealty.com. Get an appointment and get them called today. Numbers to get in, 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Find us on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence, and can email Chris at HaleVarsity.com. So, a thought here, Elijah, on are you wowed by any weekend games, anything in the Big Ten that's kind of grabbing you aside from Nebraska, Purdue? It is going to be on. Larry Johnson Sr. will be coaching Ohio State, but Ohio State will play Michigan State. Of course, you have Michigan. They are canceled. I wish Penix was playing for Indiana, and he's not hurt, but he is hurt. He's got another ACL. That was going to be it's still going to be a fun game against Wisconsin for Indiana anyway, but we'll see if Indiana kind of comes back down to earth, and we'll see what Wisconsin's all about now that they know they can't compete for a West Division title.
I mean, nothing's too special
it's
looking.
Kind of a garbage weekend of college football.
And then plus you already have the fact that college football's has such a different feel this year without fans. The SEC, they've done their best. That feels a little bit better, but especially in the Big Ten with no fans, games just feel kind of lifeless at times. That's what separates college football apart from the NFL, is the fact that there are fans there and the players care because their classmates and everyone that goes to campus is in the stadium watching them. And part of that almost goes away without the fans in the stands. So unless there's, I'll probably watch in BYU Coastal Carolina.
I have that circled as well.
That's the one game I have circled twice, but everything else this weekend's.
Yeah, and even the NFL slate's not phenomenal. Kansas City and Tampa turned out to be really good last weekend, and I know Cleveland and Tennessee are both 8-3, but Cleveland's beaten one team with a winning record this year, and I like them. I think the fun game of the weekend will be Arizona and the Rams. That could be a score fest. I may have to go belly up somewhere to watch that because Lord knows I won't get that at home.
Denver, Kansas City, Sunday Night Football, but Kansas City should steamroll the Broncos. So.
Oh, dude.
They should. It's a question of will they have.
If you're a Denver fan and you're taking a bet later on in the show for a steak and a beer, you better be asking for 17.5. That thing could get medieval. Bill Doleman's on the way with Hale Varsity.
Welcome to Hale Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hale Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Hour 2, it's Hale Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Great to be with you on a Friday. It is Boilermaker Week. The week is coming to an end. It is 5 o'clock, so have yourself a Boilermaker. We bring in the pride of Fairbury at NBC Sports. Bill Doleman with us, and Bill Doleman on Twitter. Billy D, tell me about that first Boilermaker you had with Henry Rollins on O Street in the late 80s.
It was one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer. It wasn't a Boilermaker.
Okay. Have you ever had a Boilermaker?
I'd have to. Well, here's the deal. If I did, I'd have to go back pretty much to my college days to remember if I had one, but I wouldn't remember having had one.
Thank you. That's eloquently put, not said, obviously. So, do you think of the Purdue mascot? Do you think of Drew Brees? Do you think of Big Dog Glenn Robinson? Do you think of Dumb and Dumber when you hear the word Boilermaker?
Well, I think of Purdue. Sure. Why not? In a sports-minded sense. So, yeah, I think given the fact that it is a fairly unique nickname and it's not someone who frequents Sandy's or the rail as much as I may have done in the past. So, therefore, I try to be a little more wholesome in how I would think about an institution and its mascot like the Boilermakers. But I'm sure that there are plenty of places in West Lafayette that specialize in the making of said Boilermakers.
I think you're right. So what do you think about tomorrow? The line is down to 1.5. I think there's some good news for Nebraska. There's a week's worth of topics to get into, and we'll do that in a moment. But I want to get your take on tomorrow's game.
Well, it's going to be tough. And whenever you're facing a Bob Diaco defense, I think that's pretty significant. And he's going to be pretty fired up for the what was that, about 2000?
The conflict trophy.
Yeah, that's what it was. And he wants to make a big deal out of it. And Scott's like, I don't need this replica of the Michigan AP 1997 National Football Championship piece of wood made in shop class trophy. So why don't you just keep it, and maybe we'll find a place for it next year. To me, that was one of the, bless his heart for trying something, but and I thought Scott's reaction, this goes back, 4 years, 5 years?
It's 2016.
It was just really kind of an odd, and there are a lot of these odd, trophies and whatnot that, don't make a lot of sense, but that one clearly did not, and that was a big Diaco swing and a miss, if you ask me. They've lost 3 in a row. They played in every game I think they played has been decided in single digits, if not, one score. They couldn't stop Rutgers, which anytime you say can't stop Rutgers in the same sentence, that doesn't, bode very well. If Martinez and McCaffrey are just going to continue, if Nebraska is just going to continue to run quarterback left, run quarterback right, maybe they can zero in and make the stops they couldn't make last week. Unfortunately, Nebraska has become relatively predictable in its offense, and that's just running the quarterbacks. I'm stunned, and I've got to. Was Martinez really 18 of 20 last week?
He was good,
but it was the most subtle 18 of 20 performance by a quarterback perhaps in history. And I looked at those numbers and I said, where was anything of any significance, really? Nebraska's got to get big plays out of the quarterback and more than just running the ball left and right, because that will give them a chance to set things up. I know they're without a linebacker and all that. But the thing I'm most interested in seeing, and it's the same thing pretty much every week, what kind of effort am I going to get out of my team? And other than I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, the Illinois game is one of the most disappointing Nebraska football performances I've seen in my nearly 50 years of watching Nebraska football. It just not a lot of want to. And I read Adrian Martinez's comments earlier. We got to want to win, and it's like, well, you got to expect to win. And I know we're down, but you still have to expect to win. And but trying to find the want to win is discouraging. But the Purdue game last year had so much quit in it that was really, really tough to watch. A winnable game by all stretches. But there were guys running free downfield, and you'd see Nebraska players like, I got to make at least it look like I'm somewhere in the shot. And that stands out to me when you don't see the effort from a Nebraska football player. And that Purdue game, you saw it. Just quit and half-assing it, and that's just not acceptable there. And people recognize it. The Illinois game was awful. The effort was better against Iowa. It was, and it was probably similar to what we saw at the beginning of the season against Ohio State. So that is positive, but the confidence and the want to win is still somewhat missing. Great, there's effort, but there's got to be a want to. And I get that it's boring in West Lafayette. I get that there's no atmosphere, even when there is no global pandemic at a Purdue football game. It's tough to get up for it, but you still got to get up, and you got to play, and you got to play hard. That's what I want to see most.
Bill, it sure seems like the Huskers seem to get every team's best shot. I think back to Indiana last year, they had some bulletin board material for Nebraska. I think Purdue, it was 2 years ago. They said that they took Scott Frost's press conference comment where he said this is a winnable game and used that as bulletin board material. But it does just feel like every single time the Huskers step on the field against a Big Ten foe, they're getting that team's best shot. Do you think that has been increased by how the Huskers handled this weird COVID season and their push to play football?
Well, I think it's more the fact that they just see a team that doesn't have a whole lot of want to. And as a result, coaches are going in there and going, oh, let's manufacture some out of context quote on a bulletin, for the bulletin board. Okay, if that's what you need, then go for it. But I think you see, to me, if you want to get fired up about playing Nebraska this week, I'd say, and I'm sure Adrian meant well by it, but to say we need to find, it's about wanting to win. If I'm their coach, I'm saying, guys, they're trying to figure out whether they want to win or not. Go get them. This is a wounded animal that has self-inflicted its own wounds. And so, go for it. This is a winnable. This would be Jeff Brom saying Nebraska's a winnable game, and Nebraska not doing anything about it. Then Nebraska shouldn't have to worry about bulletin board material. That's just not the way it should be. But if I'm Jeff Brom and I'm any other coach, I'm thinking, these guys are down. Go get them. You can get a win out of these guys. Might be pretty easy if you get on them early. And unfortunately, it might be kind of easy if you get a third down, and that's the most discouraging thing about it. I'm not sure we're getting everybody's best shot, but I think you're getting people taking advantage of the opportunity of Nebraska, talking itself, down a little bit and being down and, not meeting the expectations for the program, which, again, for me, is effort. The effort is the expectation. The winning should be secondary. The pride, is an expectation. The honor of the program, all of that. And the winning will take care of itself.
Bill, a thought on today's athlete, and I know I'm winding you up here, but interested in your reaction with Adrian and Scott talked a little bit about on Monday, just the uncomfort level, the discomfort of how you talk to kids or being coached hard, and just you need to know personalities, and you couldn't yell at example X like maybe example Y could take getting yelled at when maybe you or I were growing up or when Elijah was growing up. But you look at some instances where you've had a lot of attrition, and it seems like Nebraska's reached on talent versus guys that can take hard coaching or take criticism or take waiting their turn.
I think you see a lot of it in today's, younger athlete, that they have been coddled all the way through. And, we talk a lot about the transfer portal in college football. Well, things aren't working out here, so I'm going to take my IMG certificate and go someplace else and play. And, a lot of that's at the quarterback position. You don't read much in the headlines of offensive linemen and defensive linemen and whatnots that, go into the transfer portal, but it's usually the specialists and the skill position type guys who have been, coddled and encouraged, and you see the transferring amongst, from one high school to the other. You see guys who transfer from one state to another so that they get a better opportunity to go play high school ball if it's not working out for me. And, I think it happened here in Colorado, in Denver, where one of the top high school quarterbacks in my neighborhood out here in South Denver, Highlands Ranch, the kid's pretty good. Things aren't going so well. Team's not that great. So I'm going to transfer. And he moved to Iowa or something. He's
on
playing
purpose?
in Des Moines. Yeah, he's playing, went to go play his season. This might have been a year ago. And I thought he was, ending up at Kansas State or something. But anyway, so you have high school, stars that if it's not going well, they'll find an academy. They'll move to another state. The whole family will move. I don't think this is, a wave that's happening, but it is happening if you pay attention. And, guys are getting making their commitment and getting recruited hard, when they're 14, 15 years of age. And so when you're getting coddled at that age by your local coaches, by mom and dad who are trying to get you a college scholarship, and you've been told how great you are for how many years, and all of a sudden, you remember Lane Kiffin gave that kid in Delaware, a seventh grader, like a college scholarship, and commitment. And a lot of guys, the art of winning for a high school football player, and I'm not saying this is everybody, the art of winning is being coddled, being given a lot, and then when you get at a major institution, you see all the swags and bags that you get. And I've talked about Nebraska's locker room looks like an law office, and you've got bells, whistles, and toys, and that's great. And everybody else is doing it. I get it. But you get athletes that think that, once I sign my national letter of intent, I have made it and I'm done. And that's unfortunate. That's a culture that's been created. You know, you see it when you get to professional athletes. You know, you've got those guys that are on those free agent or rookie contracts, and they have a great couple of years, and boom, all of a sudden they go from making, a paltry $2 million a year to $20 million a year. And that after they sign that big deal, they ain't that big of a deal anymore. And, you know, I just think that in some ways it's become too coddled. And the want to win isn't there anymore. And that's an unfortunate thing.
Bill Doleman's with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Can find Bill on Twitter at Bill Doleman. And be sure to check Bill out, NBC Sports. Bill, I got a couple, 3 minutes left here on the topic of kind of attrition, and you've laid out the problem. Internally, how do you fix it? If you're Scott Frost, if you don't have somebody in the locker room to make it stop, you've got to set the kids straight ultimately yourself as the coach if you don't have somebody in that locker room that can police the locker room.
Well, look, you know, winning's going to solve a lot of this. And if Nebraska is 4-1 now and not 1-4, you might have some better attitudes, and people don't have the transfer portal on speed dial, right? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, they're not playing college football Tinder. You know, I don't want to go here anymore. I don't want to go here. Don't want to go here. Don't want to go here. I'll try that. I'll swipe right. I think that's how that works. You know, so, you know, guys. You know, I think if you're winning, I think that, and you have a winning attitude and winning locker room. That's why I think, you know, look, Nebraska's got what we've talked about it before: 70 or 80 guys in their first, second, or third, or second and a half year of college football. If those guys can create a culture and a stick together and win some games and have a little luck go their way, let's face it, Nebraska's not had a lot of luck. They've had no luck and no holding calls, as we read about this week. You know, they haven't had a holding call since the Solich era, right?
I was going to say Carter administration, but yeah.
Yeah, you know, so there are certainly some things where you're going, man, that is just some bad luck, and there is some bad stuff going on. But if Nebraska turns it around and you're competitive and you don't have those Illinois games where all of a sudden, you know, that just starts to permeate the mentality, you know, then I think guys are going to be thinking this is a pretty good place to be. But let's face it, some of the guys who are not wanting to be there right now, they're not used to it being, you know, 15 degrees, 20 degrees. And maybe you're seeing, you know, some of the effects of not being able to take some trips to Nebraska during a pandemic. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I remember 100 years ago, I think the guy's name was Chad Hunter, but I could be wrong on that. But there was a guy who went to Nebraska from Texas, and then he spent his first winter in Nebraska, and he thought we had snow up to our shoulders, and it was like maybe, you know, ankle high, you know, dusting. And he leaves and goes, you know, back to Texas because he just couldn't handle the weather, you know. Who knows why some of these guys are making the decisions that they're making.
Bill, got 30 seconds. I need a prediction, bud. And always enjoy your predictions here. Give me a score, Nebraska, Purdue, 11 o'clock BTN tomorrow.
Well, I don't think Nebraska reaches triple digits. I think that's going to be kind of tough to do just because of the atmosphere. But I can see Nebraska, you know, getting over 90. You know, let's go back to the good old days and maybe a 93 to let's just give Nebraska 93 and a question mark.
Okay. So 93 to 10, something like that?
Or 11.
Okay.
So let's go 93 to 3 to make it Skurs by 90.
Okay.
For sure.
90,
sure.
Yeah, that should push the over. I think it's doable.
So Rick Alloway's cheering right now with a 90.3. Okay.
That was good. That was really good.
From Avery to Ave Street, campus to Cornhusker.
Doleman, you take care, brother. It was fun to chat with you.
All right, go Big Red.
There he is.
I'm still going.
Pride of Fairbury, Bill Doleman.
He's in his 30s, but sounds like he was born with a stogie in one hand and a brew in the other.
Now, say my name.
It's Schmitty on Hail Varsity Radio.
I got the body of a taut, preteen Swedish boy.
Back to it. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Recruiting time. We are inching closer and closer to mid-December. We welcome in Recruiting Insider with HailVarsity.com and magazine, the podcast he does with Jay Foreman. We say hi to Greg Smith at Greg Smith HV on Twitter. Greg, I can smell your grill from here. Please divulge what recruits you have landed for this weekend.
Yes, I've landed a couple of high 4-stars for the grill. I've got some boneless chicken thighs. We've got bacon wrapped sirloins. We've got a couple of steak skewers, and then we got cheddar bacon burgers that are on there as well. This is what I would call being proactive, trying to get the cook out of the way for game day tomorrow as well. You got to take advantage of this nice weather we've got going on here in Lincoln today.
You know, I was a day late because I air fried the old chicken breast last night, but you know what's going to happen? I'm going to turn my grill on tomorrow and, oh, look, you're out of propane. I know that's right. I know that's what's going to happen. So, big day tomorrow for Nebraska. They are hoping, and they put a ton of effort in to make contact with Roquan Buckley, kid out of Michigan, and super talented defensive end. It's down to Sparty. It's down to Nebraska, and I don't know that Sparty's staff and Nebraska's staff will exchange holiday cards. Is that fair?
That is fair, which, hey, I'm all for kind of these spicy rivalries within the league. I feel like they've actually kind of increased over this last year, as crazy as the world has been. I feel like maybe it's all the time that these coaches have had to spend on Zoom together. Maybe that's fueling it. But no, Nebraska staff and Michigan State staff, no love lost there, but that's who's battling for Roquan Buckley. Is a guy that Nebraska has put a lot of time in. It was weird to say that he's one of the few kind of out-of-region guys that's been able to visit Nebraska during this recruiting cycle. If you remember back to January when they were able to hold that junior day, he actually made the trip out for that. So he has been on campus, and he's kind of a little bit more familiar than, you know, most recruits out of a place like Michigan would be with Nebraska and how the campus and facilities are. He has a really, really good relationship with defensive line coach Tony Tuioti, and he will be making his announcement tomorrow. I am leaning towards the Huskers on this one, but I had to give myself a little wiggle room because Sparty's not going away, and they are the local school.
Give me a thought on Buckley, just to refresh, because it's been COVID 2020. So, I mean, the recruiting that Nebraska's done has been impressive, since you can't visit, you can't observe, and vice versa. I mean, kids really can't get here. So your thought on Buckley's biggest strength and where, I guess, a player comparison is the best way to ask.
Yeah, I think that he goes 6'5", 280. His biggest strength, I give you two. Versatility is one thing that I like about him, because he's been recruited for offensive and defensive line by different colleges. He settled in on defensive line, and I think I talked to him just a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that where he thought his game improved the most was his hands, and being able to play with his hands along the defensive line after really being able to focus in on playing the position, because Michigan, they started late with high school football, but they were able to play, and so he said that really helped his game out a ton. So I think that, to me, he reminds me a little bit, a couple of years back in Nebraska's class, of Mosiah Newsom, a guy who's going to be a high motor kid who's got a really nice frame to him. And Newsom is a guy that we don't hear a ton about publicly, but I know Nebraska staff really likes him. So I think he favors kind of comparably to him, a guy that can, in a couple of years, be in the rotation on defensive line.
Greg, I want to go to the attrition topic. If you're Nebraska, you've lost 5 kids from Florida in the 2020 class. And give us your take and read on things, the why. The why you lose a guy like Fleming, the why you see Fleming do what he did against Northwestern and then gone. Same with Delancey, 2 really talented kids that chose to take off.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and it's really crazy because the most glaring example of this is Fleming, where sometimes a guy is super talented and can go out there and produce for you on the field, but do you allow that at the expense of what's happening Monday through Friday, right, or Sunday through Friday? And is that player then willing to do everything necessary to be a part of the larger team and improve the culture at large, right? And when you're in the stage of the program that Nebraska is in, you cannot take that many chances on having guys like that around. And so then on the flip side, if you're a guy like Fleming, like Delancey, some of these other guys, and you're not playing as much and the team is losing, you might look around and think, hey, I can just go ahead and get out of here. Also, because it is a little bit more in the culture down in South Florida that you kind of jump schools. Remember, a lot of these kids there in high school go to 2-3 different high schools during their high school career. So maybe it's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more normal for them to bounce around than it would be from some other places.
Greg, we heard earlier this week Scott Frost at his press conference saying that he thought maybe the Huskers had recruited the right athletes but not the right individuals to Nebraska, not the right people that are going to fit within this program. And I remember talking, I believe it was with you, earlier this year on the show about how Nebraska has sent out more power or offers to recruits than any other Power 5 school in the country. And that's kind of what Nebraska's MO has been under Scott Frost. Do you see that changing in the future as Scott kind of realizes what kind of guys he needs to bring into this program?
Not necessarily with the offers thing, because I think the offer situation, I think, is tied to making sure that a kid knows that Nebraska is seriously interested in him so that he can then take one of those unofficial visits on his own dime. I think a lot of kids, because it's just hard to get to Nebraska a lot of times for these kids, and they're not in driving distance. So before I'm going to take that long trip from Texas or from Jersey or from Washington or California, I need to know that you guys are serious about me. So I think it's more tied to that. But I do think that Nebraska will take a little bit different of approach and maybe trying to do a deeper dive on getting to know kids and what type of teammate they are and what type of student they are, how they are in the community, that sort of thing, will probably get weighed a little bit heavier going forward than just, hey, we can get guy X, mold him into what we needed to be off the field and kind of go from there because his talent is so great. You may see a little bit of a shift in that case.
Greg, do you worry about the culture at Nebraska? And I hate to go back into culture, but you're bringing in high-level athletes, guys that may have a different idea or have gotten by on talent, but there's a standard you're trying to set. And, the policing needs to happen within the locker room. Is there enough respect level built up in the current locker room with the 1-4 season to be able to call a guy out and have it be effective?
Yeah, I do worry about it just because we're still kind of talking about this, to be honest. Like the reason that, like, even having this conversation at this point in year 3 does make me a little bit nervous, but I do feel like with each passing year under Frost, I think you are getting more buy-in from guys and more of the culture that he wants. And I think that you heard it kind of in what Adrian was saying. I think it was this week about how guys take feedback and criticism, and you're just going to have to mold that a little bit to how 2020's athletes are versus say when Scott was playing in '97 and how things happened then. So I do worry about it a little bit. But I also think that Nebraska needs to sort out what it is that they're going for on the recruiting trail and how they eventually want this thing to look moving forward, because that does start with who they're recruiting.
2 Florida kids, one in the transfer portal, another a monster target. We'll start with Patrick Payton. Any nervousness that he doesn't end up in Lincoln?
Oh, there's always a little bit of nervousness when so a couple of things. He's having a huge season, or had a huge season for his team down in South Florida. A lot of sacks. He's been very productive, so that's going to raise his recruiting profile. He's no longer a hidden gem down there. So that makes you a little bit nervous. I know Miami, Florida State, those schools are still all over him. I think Penn State has faded a little bit in that pursuit, but I think that Nebraska has been well aware that they were going to have to continue to recruit him throughout the process. And I think right now I'm comfortable saying that he's going to end up being in the class, but it is recruiting. You never know, things change quickly.
Milton, is he on Nebraska's radar? Is Nebraska on his radar? Or is it a situation where McKenzie will look at a Florida State or an Ole Miss?
So So that's going to be super interesting. I have not heard really anything one way or the other yet on that. Mum's been the word so far on my end. I personally think that they should at least kick the tires on it to see what his feelings are about coming to Nebraska. But I don't know if I think Nebraska would have more interest, in my opinion, than Milton would have in coming here, just because the situation isn't the greatest for I don't know if he's going to put them over the top per se next year.
Greg, let's go to the islands. It'd be nice to do an in-person story and radio show from the islands, but got outside linebacker Lyndon Rouley, Hawaiian kid, also Titus, the wideout, a talented receiver that's going to wait till February, but where's Nebraska in on those two from Hawaii?
So out of those two, I like Nebraska's chances more with Lyndon Rouley, the linebacker from Hawaii. I think that he's a kid that's about 6'3", 220, has some position flexibility to play either inside or outside. He's a good run and hit kid. I like Nebraska's chances. They've been on him, I think, well over a year now. And even though obviously he hasn't been able to visit Nebraska, which I think was the thing that he was holding out a lot of hope that the dead period would end up being lifted. So was Titus. But it just isn't happening. I think Lyndon at this point is more comfortable, will make a decision in January for that what will now be virtual All-American game that usually happens on ABC each January. He'll make his decision announcement there. Titus will take it, like you said, to February, and it'll be really interesting to see how things go with him in Nebraska. Nebraska is recruiting him as a wide receiver. He's about 6'1", 190. He's a good player, tough kid, but you may see if there's more wide receiver attrition or anything like that postseason, you can see Nebraska. That's where you can see Nebraska really make a strong push for him.
Greg, I'm going to hold you on over to another quick segment. Hang on 2 seconds.
Sounds good.
More with Greg Smith and recruiting insider, HailVarsity.com and magazine. 70% of people in fatal crashes in Nebraska not wearing a seatbelt. If used properly, seatbelts can reduce risk of fatal injury by 60%. Your best defense in any crash. Buckling up, brought to you by the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. More with Greg Smith, HailVarsity.com and magazine. Friday forecast, Clausburn on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, wrapping up with Greg Smith, Hail Varsity Radio, recruiting insider at Greg Smith HV on Twitter. His podcast with Jay Foreman, must listen to on the Herd At Media Network. HailVarsity.com is where you find it. Also, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. Let's talk about Savea, the defensive lineman out of Vegas. Where do things sit with him?
Yeah, I think Nebraska's in a good spot with Savea. He's gone really quiet since I think the last thing he tweeted out was that he was kind of shutting his recruitment down and focusing on school. But actually, the last thing that he was tweeting out was like live tweeting a Husker game, which is really probably a really good sign for Nebraska's chances here. I think he ends up in the class, and he's part of a kind of a weird domino effect with defensive line, and why it's so difficult to kind of pin down who are going to be these final couple of defensive linemen in the class, because if he's going to have a spot, then there's really only probably one more spot left for a defensive lineman, and he's definitely a must-take kid. So that's where it gets really interesting and trying to fit the puzzle pieces with the 2021 class.
Well, you're looking at, 23, maybe 25. Do you keep a couple spots open? And the token of Ante Dickerson maybe flip. I don't know.
That's the thing that you have to weigh, which is it's funny. I feel like I say this almost every year, and that's what makes guys like Sean Dillon, director of player personnel for Nebraska, makes those jobs so hard. Is that yes, you have 25 open spots, but especially in this year, you better keep a spot or two open for a transfer, because as we've seen, we've talked about with Nebraska, with UCF, with other programs, there's been transfers galore, so guys are going to come available.
This will lead us into the Friday forecast. So, Greg, give us your thought Saturday, Nebraska, Purdue.
Yeah, it's two similar teams, and if you listen to Jeff Brom this week, it sounds a lot like Scott Frost's press conferences. They've got to find a way to win close games. They've got to eliminate mistakes. They've got to play better on special teams. And so it's kind of interesting that way. It's which team can figure out how to right some of those wrongs. Purdue obviously has a couple of dynamic playmakers and more in David Bell. But I think Nebraska should be able to move the ball against Purdue and then try to make Purdue's offense one-dimensional. I think Nebraska can come out with a victory here, but I think it's going to be close, like somewhere in like the 27-21 range. I'll go with the Big Red.
The line is down to 1.5 points. That means a few things. We don't know who, but it could be some impactful guys that may have opted out for Purdue, or they have COVID. The other side of it is maybe Nebraska's getting a shot in the arm back. Maybe you see Mills tomorrow running the football. Not that Mills is worth a whole point by himself, but just the fact that maybe Mills and Tompkins are back from the injury bug. Greg, enjoy the grill at Greg Palooza tomorrow during the Nebraska-Purdue game. We expect tweeted pics, okay?
I will do that. You guys enjoy the game.
Good stuff from Greg Smith. We'll see how many picks Nebraska football can get. Only 9 sacks allowed in several hundred dropbacks by Purdue quarterbacks. Interesting, Husker Game Day tweeting out, the Purdue-Nebraska line has jumped around this week from anywhere around Nebraska getting a 0.5 point to now 2.5 points to down to 1.5 points. The public mood shifting, and I'm reading the Husker Game Day tweet, shifted to 55% of all bets on Purdue and about 90% of the money on the Boilermakers. So I sent a quick text to our dear friend Danny Burke with VSiN. He's hitting the airwaves in about 15 minutes. And he's like, look, there's been a lot of buyback on the Husker game because it's almost a pick-em, right? 1.5 points. He says, so later, sharp money will be hitting Nebraska.
Good to have an expert on the inside.
Hey, thanks. Is that a cardigan? No, it's a cardigan. It's not a pullover. Dumb and Dumber quote. Again, the Boilermaker.
I need to go actually watch that scene.
Well, this is when they're in the van running away from Seabass, speeding away. Let's get into the forecast. Clausburn has swallowed too many balloons, and we miss him another week. It's all right. This is for the steak and the beer bets.
Oh, Lord, I don't think I like that.
You just want to you want to save the steak and the beer for 5 minutes from now?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
We can do Denver, Kansas City. That'll be fun.
Sure.
Let's do that.
All right, cool. Is it supposed to snow? Or they already played in Donkeyland?
It's not supposed to snow.
Is it in Denver or is it in Kansas City?
It's in Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah, it already snowed in Denver for the first game this year. So.
Yeah, that's what I thought I remember. All right, let's get to it. Forecast is this. Indiana at Wisconsin. Badgers minus 13.5. I think Indiana is going to make this interesting. They were buried against Ohio State and came back, the difference being no Penix. And I don't know a whole hell of a lot about the Indiana backup, but I know the lines of scrimmage are good, and I know the run game's been solid, although that Indiana's back may be a bit dinged. But I like Indiana finding a way to get their receivers to football. Really good talent, really good skill. Wisconsin wins. I think Indiana covers this. I think the Badgers win by about 10, 31-21. It could be all wet. I like Indiana to cover this. Above all.
I also like Indiana to cover this, and I'm actually going to predict a straight-up Indiana win.
So you think they're going to beat Wisconsin?
I do.
I'm still stuck with Wisconsin coming off of the COVID week and crushing Michigan. Maybe that's a lot about Michigan.
Yeah, I don't think Wisconsin's had the opposition this year, and they don't have anything to play for anymore either. Whereas Indiana, they need some help, but they could still make a play for the Big Ten championship game, assuming Ohio State doesn't get in the game next week, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think Indiana gets the win straight up in a close one. Indiana 28, Wisconsin 27.
BYU, Coastal Carolina, the Cougs by 10. Coastal Carolina is fun. But BYU's a whole lot of trouble. We're talking grown men with many people in their family, with minivans. I think this is going to be, it's a cross-country trip, but I like BYU double digits in this thing, and it'll be on the Ocho, so good luck finding it. But give me BYU 41, Coastal Carolina 27.
Yeah, I don't see Coastal Carolina's defense stopping Zach Wilson and BYU. I think that offense is really good. Remember, Coastal Carolina got outgained by Kansas whenever they beat them. They won the game. That's all that matters. But I got BYU 44, Coastal Carolina 20. BYU
So
rolls.
it's just a smackdown, kind of like the old Boise game. Difference being the third-team quarterback. Let's dive into Nebraska and Purdue. Purdue favored by 1.5. Give me Nebraska, first team to 30. And I think Nebraska's defense does just enough. I think if Mills is back, along with the quarterback run game, that is the difference. First team to 30, Nebraska 31, and Purdue 28. Another nail-biter, but Nebraska gets it handled this time.
I think it's a one-possession game. I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think either team gets to 30, but I do think it's a good one-possession game. A lot of field goals from both teams. Do some quick math here. I got the Huskers 23, and what was my math here? 23 and Purdue 18.
Okay, 5 field goals.
Wait, sorry, 17. Bad, terrible math.
It's all right. You're in broadcasting. So we both say Nebraska, and we will both be heartbroken Monday if it's another one-possession loss. We'll wind down a Friday, weekend edition tomorrow, but back for one last shot after this.
Miss us?
Come here, brother. Give me a hug. Bring it in for the real thing.
We're on call for you. Catch the podcast at HailVarsity.com, the ESPN Lincoln app, or download them on iTunes.
Saddle up, partner.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, Hail Varsity Radio presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Our old boy Seth at Lazari's. He's giving me the thumbs up. He's giving me the non-finger, the thumb, with my picks. That makes me feel good. Crashing down.
No word on my picks here?
Crashing down Sunday morning, man. Like, oh, what was I thinking? I was listening to Schmidt and his picks. All right, this is the most important pick. And I know Seth Lazarius is a Donkey fan, Denver fan, big-time Denver guy. He's so cool, he's probably hung out with John Elway. And Elijah Herbel is the biggest Denver fan I know, and he wears that 97 AFC championship. AFC, let's say it can't be 96. That AFC 97 conference championship sweatshirt from time to time. It's been miserable, but at least you'll have a quarterback and not a wide receiver Sunday. Right? I mean, you'll have some quarterback back.
Yes.
Not that it'll matter.
Yeah, calling Drew Lock a quarterback after seeing an NFL quarterback after seeing what he's done this season might be a stretch. But
everybody was on that kid early.
Yeah.
No.
He's had a lot thrown in his face this year, so I'm not going to judge him based off this year, but I'm not that hopeful anymore.
So the line is what?
Vegas has it at 13.5.
13.5. You're going to take your Broncos, or you will risk losing that card to just go
I'll take
buffet table on the edibles every time you go to Denver.
I'll take the Broncos if I can stretch that line to 14.5.
Yeah, easy. No, I was going to probably give you. It's probably going to give you 16.
I don't need 16.
Yes, you will.
Nah.
So you think it's 2 touchdowns?
I think the Chiefs really flex their muscle early, and the Broncos have shown themselves to be a second-half team.
Denver hanging around.
I think it's more the Chiefs are up like 21 at halftime, and they kind of let their foot off the gas in the
Here's
second half.
my question: Is Kansas City as laser focused? Because you saw them jump out. Think of the last 2 weeks Kansas City's had. Dogfight, Vegas, and they win in incredible fashion, 35-31. And you saw the hangover last week where Atlanta just went pinata on Vegas. The hangover.
Yeah.
And then they go from Vegas, swear jar, they go from Vegas to Tampa. and they jump out at 17 rip over Brady and company. And then they hang on 27-24, and somehow Tampa covers that number. So I'm wondering, it's Denver, you have Vegas to avenge your loss, and I won that one. And because I got
not gonna let me forget that.
it just happened. Because I took Vegas in the 8. I think you might be onto something where it's probably a double-digit win.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm confident it's a double-digit win for the Chiefs.
I say Kansas City wins it by 17.
Okay.
I think they are that good and that locked in to repeat that they're just going to mow everybody.
We'll come back and check the tape. I got the Chiefs up like 24-3 at halftime, and they end up winning.
Again, I like filet mignon. Talk to you tomorrow morning, weekend edition, 7 a.m. Have a good